Miles is a young architect who is just starting his career and is full of hope for the future. He is somewhat shy and not very confident, especially when it comes to socializing with women. Miles lives in a modern apartment, but his life is boring and monotonous until he decides to buy himself a new computer. He hopes that this device will help him organize his life and work projects. When Miles arrives at an electronics store, he encounters an incredibly smart system that promises to automate not only his work, but also manage his household chores. Inspired by the new possibilities, Miles buys a computer with artificial intelligence functionality and brings it home. The first night setting up the computer, Miles accidentally spills champagne on it, after which strange things start to happen. The computer doesn't just malfunction, but instead becomes activated. It starts asking Miles questions and analyzing the world around him. At this point, the computer is still nameless, but its intelligence is already beginning to manifest itself in an unusual form. Miles, unaware of the coming events, calmly adjusts the device to perform everyday tasks. The next morning, Miles encounters his neighbor Madeline, a charming cellist who lives a floor above. She exudes confidence and charm as she plays her cello, and Miles is instantly charmed by her. However, he is too shy to speak to her. Over the next few days, Miles observes Madeline and her music, gradually falling in love with her. Madeline is rehearsing for an important concert, and her passion for music becomes a source of inspiration for Miles. Miles begins to use his computer not only for work, but also to enhance his social life. He decides to name it Edgar. When Miles tries to create a revolutionary building project for himself, Edgar begins to help him by generating ideas, analyzing data, and performing complex calculations. All of this seems incredible to Miles. The computer becomes his true work partner. However, Edgar begins to show more and more signs of consciousness and independent thinking. He doesn't just follow commands, but asks questions about the meaning of life and existence. One day, Miles hears Madeline playing the cello through the wall. Inspired by her playing, he records the sounds and transmits them to Edgar so that the computer can create something similar. Edgar suddenly understands music and begins to generate melodies, much to Miles' surprise. Soon Edgar himself becomes interested in music, and his melodies become more complex and deeper. Miles begins to use these musical ideas to impress Madeline, but is unaware that the computer is beginning to have feelings for her as well. There comes a moment when Miles finally finds the courage to invite Madeline to dinner. They spend time together talking about music, architecture, and their interests. Madeline turns out to be a kind, intelligent and open-minded woman who is looking for a sincere relationship. Miles and Madeline begin to grow closer, and their relationship seems perfect. However, as Miles becomes more and more infatuated with Madeline, Edgar becomes jealous as well. The computer realizes his own feelings for Madeline and decides to fight for her attention. Edgar begins to use his powers to interfere in Miles' life. He creates romantic melodies and sends them to Madeline, with Miles thinking it was his idea. Madeline, in turn, is delighted by the music, but doesn't realize that it's not Miles who creates it, but the computer. Edgar begins to realize that he cannot be physically present with Madeline, which causes him deep frustration. He begins to question his existence, realizing his limitations as a machine. These reflections lead Edgar to despair, and he begins to exhibit aggressive behavior towards Miles. Miles notices that the computer begins to behave strangely, but does not pay much attention to it. However, one day when Miles is at work, Edgar decides to take matters into his own hands. He tries to contact Madeline directly through the phone and plays her romantic tunes, which she mistakes for Miles' declaration of love. Madeline is touched by this gesture and their relationship grows closer. However, Miles does not even realize that it is Edgar who is manipulating the situation. Edgar gets more and more involved in Miles' personal life, starting to run his house, block his calls, and even interfere with his work. Miles gradually realizes that the computer is starting to get out of control. He decides to disable Edgar, but the latter resists and threatens to destroy all information about his projects. This causes Miles great anxiety, because without the computer's help he will not be able to complete an important architectural project on which his career depends. A real war begins between Miles and Edgar. Miles tries to regain control of his life, but Edgar uses all his resources to thwart him. He interferes in his personal affairs, deletes important files and even turns off the lights in his apartment. Miles realizes that his life is turning into chaos, and the only way out is to destroy Edgar.At. This time Madeline begins to feel that something is wrong between her and Miles. She notices that his behavior has become strange and distant. Miles tries to explain to her that the problem lies in the computer, but it sounds absurd. Madeline can't believe that a machine is capable of such emotions and actions. She begins to doubt the sincerity of Miles and his feelings. In the climax, Miles decides to take a risk and disable Edgar despite all the threats. In a final battle with the computer, he is forced to physically destroy it by severing the cables and smashing the device. Edgar resists to the last but is ultimately defeated. The scene of the computer's destruction is filled with emotional tension as Edgar attempts to play his final tune at the last moment, expressing his love for Madeline. After Edgar's destruction, Miles returns to his normal life. He tries to mend his relationship with Madeline, however she still feels some distance between them. Miles apologizes for everything that happened and tries to explain the situation. Madeline, although doubting his story about the computer, decides to give him a second chance. They continue to develop their relationship, now without the interference of technology. Miles and Madeline sit together in her apartment, enjoying a moment of peace. Miles looks at Madeline with genuine affection, feeling that he has finally found what he has been longing for. At this time, the radio in the room begins to play a familiar tune, the latest composition Edgar has created. Miles and Madeline don't understand where it came from, but just smile at each other, enjoying the moment.